I want to give a quick shout out to all my patrons. Thank you so much for all of the continued support. And I am done. Okay, so I just got done listening to Republic of Thieves. This is book 3 of the Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch, and I want to give you my unedited thoughts on finishing this book, which was just right now. So I like this book. It's a 4 out of 5 stars for me, but this review is going to sound very negative because I felt like there was so much missed potential in this one. It had so many good things to it, but it failed so spectacularly in some key plot areas and just weird writing choices in terms of the progression of the story, that it hurt what would have otherwise been a fantastic book. I'm upset by many things. And so this is probably going to sound like the most negative 4-star review I've ever given, but I say it from a place of love because of how much I love this series, how much I love this author, the characters, the world, the prose, all these wonderful things. But it just feels like it's so held back that it makes me upset. So I'm also going to do a little weird thing in this video, and I'm going to mess around with it in the future, but I'm going to talk non-spoilers like I always do. But at a certain point, I'm going to break. I'll be very clear about it, and I'll put a little tag down at the bottom in the video slider that shows you. But I also want to talk about spoilers, because I can't talk about the things that make me most upset about this without talking about those spoilers. So a little bit of background. So this is not the first time that I have listened to this book. I listened to it 2 or 3 years back. Probably 2.5 now, or closer to 3. And it was one of the first fantasy audiobooks that I've ever listened to, because I went on a Reddit thread and I saw, like, what are the quintessential best audiobook performances for fantasy books. And this one was right up there with The First Law. And I absolutely loved the first book when I listened to it, and I gave it a 5 stars. I ended up giving the second one a 4 stars and the third one 3 stars. I ended up revising these rankings later on when I realized that I'm only giving lower scores to these books because I liked them less than the previous one without really looking at them on their own and realizing that there's a lot of variance between a really, really high tier 5-star book and one that kind of barely makes it in. So I ended up revising it originally to 5 stars, 4.5, and 4. Now, when I'm going through these rereads of them, or re-listens, or whatever you want to say, I ended up giving a 5. I actually found that I liked the second book even more than the first book, and I am now having to keep my same ranking here. And that's also disappointing, because the fact that I found so much to love out of the second book that I didn't find the first time made me feel like I'm going to go through the same experience here and end up loving it, and maybe not as much as before, but nonetheless loving it. And as I was going through this, I did find myself loving it, but the story hits a wall. And I'll talk more about the wall later on when I talk about spoilers, but it ends up hitting a wall, and it never kind of breaks through it. And the wall, in my eyes, happens around the 3/4 of the way mark into this story, and it hurts. It hurts so bad, because if the first quarter of the story was struggling, but then the rest of the book was wonderful, that's an excusable thing to me. But when a book fails at wrapping things up and leaves you wanting a lot more, that's a hard thing to forgive. Now, furthermore in this story, I find that a lot of people are upset, deeply upset, in the same kind of vein as Patrick Rothfuss with Kingkiller and George R.R. Martin with A Song of Ice and Fire, at how long it has taken Scott Lynch to write the 4th book in this series. This is a beloved series, not nearly as popular as those other two, but you have an author now that has gone, I believe, over 10 years from writing the 3rd book to the 4th book with absolutely no hope in sight. Now, I shouldn't say never. My current mindset is that I don't get upset at authors if they can't come out with a future book. I used to. I was deeply upset, especially at George R.R. Martin. But I've found over time that as I've gotten older and kind of more at peace with life, that life is too short to be upset at things that you don't need to. And being upset at an artist for not having the inspiration and the drive and being able to produce a product that I could consume when there are quite literally tens of thousands of other products out there that I could consume in the meantime is very selfish and kind of ridiculous. Not to call you out if you kind of believe that, but my personal trying to be at peace with the world, finds that perspective to be ridiculous for myself. So I don't get upset at that. Do I wish that the next book would come out? Heck yeah. I would be the first person to pre-order it, and I would consume it so quickly that it's not even funny. But I'm okay with it. And I also, in this case, can forgive it a lot more because this author has been very clear about coming out with mental health problems, I think depression, surrounding, or maybe anxiety, surrounding how much he believes he's let down readers with the quality of the books, and has like crippling anxiety when trying to write the next book. I believe, now he hasn't outwardly said this, I don't think, that he's basically written the last book and he's just kind of editing it over and over and over and trying to perfect it. And I can sympathize with that. I don't go through these kind of feelings myself in life, but I understand people that do. And, mental health problems are a very real thing in this world, and one that we should all do better at being more compassionate about. So Scott Lynch, you've got my support, buddy. Do your thing. And if you never come out with the fourth book, that's okay, because I've, got to read a wonderful series and I cherish it. Nonetheless, I got problems here. And, let me talk about the things that I love in the spoiler-free review, though. I can't get enough of these characters. I love them, especially the relationship that Jean and Locke have together. These are what I think as like the greatest buddy duo in fantasy history. They get along so well. They've been through so many, trials and tribulations and deep, deep brotherly love for each other. And even though they're not brothers, but this profound friendship that they have is heartwarming, and I love it. But it's not this rosy story. I love that you have this so almost like cute story between these two best friends among this backdrop of a very dark world and dark deeds that these characters have to do and upsetting the wrong people all the time because of their job as thieves. It's a really nice dynamic. I love when things are complicated like that. And it works to perfection here. Now, the basic premise of this story, without ruining things that have gone on in the past, is that you've got these thieves that constantly in these books find themselves in a situation where they're trying to rob somebody, and they end up getting in thick and trying to get the job done. But in this one, it's a little bit different in that they are compelled by force to rig an election in a foreign city. So they go to this foreign city. There are reasons I don't want to say for why they have to do this, but they are paid to work for a certain party at getting their party elected. It's done by having these individual precincts that they have to get, a certain number of people. I think the magic number is 9. If they get at least 9 out of the 17, then they will get their party elected and they will have done their job correctly. So it's a rigging an election story. Now that speaks to me. I work in politics. I'm a chief of staff for a politician. Before that, I worked as a campaign manager and a campaign consultant. I'm deeply familiar and have deep love for campaigns. So to read a story with some of my favorite characters and a writing style that I just thoroughly love in this amazing world, and I get to go through this topic of rigging an election, which is a concept that I've never read in a fantasy book, is like tailor-made for me. And so it's just set up so brilliantly that I love so many things about the story and the way that it's told. I mean, the prose here is just magical. Nothing has gotten worse over time. I love it to bits. It's witty, it's fun. The level of cursing in this story, which I normally can kind of roll my eyes at, is so inventive. It just makes me laugh out loud. I love the world here. We get to go to a new city, experience a brand new thing with a lot of different magical elements to this city that I don't want to ruin for anybody, but not overly done. It's just awesome. It's so awesome. And, I love, without, again, spoiling anything, this series does a lot of flashbacks, and it really utilized it in the first book, and it's gone back to it here. I guess it did it in the second book quite a bit too, but more so in the first and the third, where at least half the story, or I'd say about 50-50, half the story is being told in the present tense and this con they're trying to do, and then it flips back and tells these stories of these characters' childhood and how they were learning to be thieves, and it's a really fun backdrop. Now, a lot of stories do this whole cutting back in time thing, And it feels like they're doing it for the sake of doing it. And it's just not the case here, because every time that we go back, maybe not right away, but maybe later in the story, it's relevant. We've learned lessons, we've gone through things that these characters have gone through, and it's teeing up something that makes sense later on for the present day. And that's awesome. Now, not every single little thing, it's not too perfect, but it's perfect enough where when you look back on it, especially on a reread, you're learning these things and you're like, that makes sense why this came up when it did. And it works together so nicely. And that back in time story is essentially a story about how these five people that are in this little band of thieves, kids, are kicked out of their house from their thief master. He needs a vacation, and he needs a vacation from them. And the kids have to go fulfill this contract where they go participate in a play for this guy in another city that needs free help. And they're not playwrights. These kids have no idea what they're doing. But they're the skills that they have that makes them wonderful thieves also make them good at acting. And so that's really a story. There's a romance angle to this, which has not really been present in the other ones. There's a character that pops up that we've heard about, but we didn't really ever see, that we now get to see and learn about. And it's just a beautiful dynamic. I love the back in time aspect of these stories, but it's the present tense stories that I had my biggest problem with. And some of the back in time ones too. But yeah, so overall, before I jump into the spoilers, would I recommend this book? Yes. Is it as good as the others? No. But it's still a fun story. I would still recommend it. And it ultimately makes me really hungry for more and wanted to come back to what made this series great and take all these wonderful elements from this book, bring back some of the plot devices that made the first couple so successful, and we'll just have something special because the writing has not decreased one iota, and I just can't wait to see what Scott Lynch has in store for us if and when he comes out with the next book. And I think he talked about coming out with some novellas first that are going to bridge the gap, and I'm really excited about those too. Or maybe short stories, but I think novellas, which will be awesome. And, short stories would be a little short, but a nice novella would be a perfect kind of story for what's being told here. So, I'm going to put up a little spoiler warning here, and we are now going to talk spoilers. You gone? Everybody gone that doesn't belong here? Great. Okay, people that have read this, let's chat. Here's my problems. Here's my specific problems. I'd say I would classify the problems in two major categories. Maybe I'll go further than that, but I don't take notes. I'm just going off the top of my head here, and I think there's two major problems here. Three, now that I'm thinking about it. Okay, three major problems. One of which I think you're going to hear on every review you've ever heard of this. Two of which you might not hear as much. And let's talk about those two first. Okay, and probably my biggest problem. We don't get to see Locke and his partnership with Jean in a successful light. In the first two books, part of what made them so successful, I think, is you got to see this formula that works so perfectly. You get to see them wanting to pull off this con, in this case, rigging an election. Great premise. They get into it. Bad stuff happens continually. They find themselves in really perilous situations, but they end up using their wits and their expert thievery to claw out of it, have some unexpected way to get out of it, some deeper thing that they're working on that the reader's not aware of, and in the end pull off this amazing heist, in this case, rigging the election to perfection, and walking away, you feeling like you're reading about the world's greatest thieves. But in this story, what we see is Tabitha, the love interest of Locke that's been brought up in the first two books, and you finally get to see her, which is awesome. I love that we got that delayed gratification of finally meeting this character and learning about them. But you see Tabitha being the expert. Basically, everything that happens in this book is Locke and Jean trying to rig this election and getting foiled by Tabitha time and time and time again. We see them successful in basically is they end up constantly getting screwed over by her, and then they end up getting out of that. But they never get one up on her. There's a couple little moments where they're pulling something on her, but it's not they're on defense the whole time. And at no point do they end up pulling this thing off. In fact, at the end of this, they force a tie. What? I mean, that's not great plot device. It's boring, and it makes me disappointed as the reader. I want to see them succeed and know they can use these skills to perfection, and it just didn't happen. You're constantly seeing themselves get foiled over and over and over again. That sucks. It's not entertaining. Another problem I had with this story is the whole premise here is that they're going to rig this election. But they don't spend time ever focusing on the election aspects of this. It's like they're playing childish gimmicks on each other. They're trying to, screw over 𝐒𝐵𝐻𝑒𝑒𝑡ha. 𝐒𝐵𝐻𝑒𝑒𝑡ha's trying to screw over them. But at no point do we see them trying to get votes. At the end, it just all of a sudden speeds up in the last 50 pages of this thing, or maybe the last 100, up until the last 50, because the final 50 is this ridiculous thing I'm going to talk about in a moment. But we get 50 pages of actually trying to do what they're supposed to do. And hundreds of pages of them just playing childish pranks on each other. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. And all of a sudden when we get to it, it's like, of course you're not going to win the election. You've never focused on actually winning it. There's so many entertaining things you could do that would move this plot forward, but we never get to see it. Especially as somebody that's coming from a political realm, it's just mind-boggling. And not just a hole in the plot, but it focuses on something kind of dumb. What's the point of trying to screw each other over when you're not even trying to do the real thing that you're assigned to do? It's kind of pointless. And I mean, part of what it's doing is it's trying to empower and embolden 𝐒𝐵𝐻𝑒𝑒𝑡ha as a character and showing how capable she is. But we don't have the love for 𝐒𝐵𝐻𝑒𝑒𝑡ha that I think Scott Lynch thought that we'd have. We love Locke and John because we've spent 3 books now with them. But we didn't get to see 𝐒𝐵𝐻𝑒𝑒𝑡ha other than some vague references to her in the couple books. So we don't have a love for her like we do those main characters. And so maybe he wants us to be rooting on this character, but almost none of us are, because that's not the heroes of this. She's not the hero of this story. She's a secondary character. And he wants us to be happy about this other character when I just want Locke and John to be happy. And if she gets dragged along with it, that's great. And there's ways that maybe they both could have been successful at the same time, screwed over the people that are trying to screw over them. That would have been cool. There's ways you could have done this, but it just wasn't done here. It's like they just keep, and even then, they're just getting screwed over by the people above them. And that's not fun either. And so it just zapped the entertainment factor out of the story. The biggest problem I have with the story is, I think the biggest problem everybody has with this story is the way that the Bonds mages are used. Now, the Bonds mage are these characters that have superpower magical skills. Locke and John screwed over one in the first book, and it's still getting brought up here. I wish the Bonds mage would just go away. But this whole story is about them forcing these characters to do this. Okay, fine. But when the story finishes, we get them screwing them over once again, and bringing up some asinine twist on how Locke is actually this Bonds mage that wiped his own brain and reincarnated himself into Locke, and Locke doesn't realize it. It's convoluted. Not so convoluted that it doesn't make sense. It makes sense, but it's dumb. And I don't care for that aspect of the story. We're not reading this story to get some weird, magical element out of this. The magic should take a back seat to the hijinks and being thieves. But it's not. Now it's coming to the forefront. You don't get to see any happiness from Locke. Locke ends up sad and disappointed. He lets down 𝐒𝐵𝐻𝑒𝑒𝑡ha because, she thinks that he's interested in her only because she's a redhead, because his wife and the old mage was. And even though he doesn't have any idea about this, she thinks he does. And it's dumb. I can't say it any other way. And it makes me disappointed that it feels like that's where the series is going. Like the next book is going to have to deal with this, and the next one, that's going to be at the forefront when it should be way in the back. I mean, in my mind, I felt like the Bonds mage in the first book had too much of a presence in the first place. But whatever. You defeated him. You won. Let's move on to some other goal. In the second book, there was a vague reference to Bonds mage, but that's it. And whatever. If you need to throw that in there just to like appease yourself, Scott Lynch, that's fine. But this third book was all about it, and that sucks. You know, it majorly sucks. And it's disappointing because there's just so much promise here that wasn't utilized, and I wish so much that there were some basic things rewritten about this. Like, I wish, obviously this would never happen, I'm not that important, but I wish Scott Lynch would come to me and say, Matt, here's what I'm planning on writing. And I go, on major plot points, I'm like, nope, nope, nope. Go write about them having fun. Go write about some heist. Get back to what the fans of this series are clamoring for, because I'm not the only one that feels this way. And he would have come out with a masterpiece, because he is an expert writer. So, rant over. I'm going to be done with this video. This is like my longest review ever. I try to keep these things to like 12 minutes, and now we're at like 20. So, that's it. Wrapping up. I'm upset. I hope for so much more, but still love this series and can't wait to read the next book. So, that's it for me. Thank you so much. And as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, CJ, Doust, Darren, Gregory, Jonathan, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, 𝗏𝗏𝐿, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Sydney Baker, Tahir, Anna, Andra, Blair, Brock, Evan, Fanixan, Harry B, Joe, Kat Mick, Maria, Michael Sugarman, Sky, TW57, 𝗏𝗏𝐿𝐴𝐴𝐿, and Zion. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and if you want to watch some more content from my channel, click over here and I've got some good videos for you. Thanks so much.